Hello F1 fans! Welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with myself Harry, Vasco and David. And in this episode, each one of us is going to present his favorite season since watching Formula 1. And we're going to compare these and also discuss why we think so. We want to thank Kumetric for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you are interested in media analysis and look for opportunities in that sphere, Kumetric is the right place for you. You can check out their website in the description below. And let's begin with Vasco.
We'll start chronologically with the first season that I've ever watched. That was the 2010 season, the first season of the Red Bull domination era with 4 world titles for Sebastian Vettel, who in 2010 became the youngest F1 champion ever. And throughout this season, we saw some very interesting things, fascinating for me. The new point system changed from 2009 to the point system that we know nowadays. Also, that was the first season that F1 decided to abandon refueling, and it is the same till nowadays. Also, that was the last season of Bridgestone as a tire supplier to the F1. Also, during this season, we saw the return of Michael Schumacher at the F1 grid with the Mercedes team. That was like a successor to Brown GP. We all know the amazing story of Brown GP. That was also the last season without the usage of the DRS, which is also interesting because some of the actions that happened throughout this season led to the implementation of the drag reduction system. And probably the most interesting thing for me throughout that season and what makes it my favorite one since I've been watching F1 is the finale of the season in Abu Dhabi. That first title for Red Bull, that first title for Vettel, the fact that 4 title contenders theoretically went to the last race of the season, and in the end of the season, Hamilton, Alonso, Vettel and Webber were separated by only 16 points, makes it one of the best F1 seasons in the recent history. And every time when I hear Du bist Weltmeister, something is happening with me. That is like my favorite childhood memory from F1, and that's what makes 2010 the best season that I've watched since I started with this beautiful sport. What are your opinions on the 2010 season?
2010 season was one of the best in recent times, undoubtedly. As you mentioned, the title fight, the 4-way battle. And also I have to point out that Sebastian Vettel, who won the championship, didn't lead the championship throughout the entire season until the very last race, which was quite interesting. We had Fernando Alonso's first season for Ferrari, which was very successful, but just short of the title. We also had Mercedes' first season in F1, which was quite a milestone, especially considering where they are nowadays. We only had 5 different race winners, but it was very competitive at the top, evenly spread with race wins. You had Sebastian Vettel, who had 5 wins. Alonso also had 5 wins. Webber had 4 wins. Hamilton had 3, and Button 2. It was very competitive at the front, and it was almost like, even though you did have these top 3 teams dominating the rest, you never knew which race is Red Bull's race, which race is McLaren's, which race is Ferrari's, constantly changing, and the back and forth aspect of the season is what really made it interesting for me.
And we saw that the small teams can cause trouble to the big teams, and there is no better example than what Renault did to Fernando Alonso and Vitaly Petrov, who managed to help Fernando Alonso at the end of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix for so many laps, and eventually that was what costed him the title. So a bit of craziness throughout the whole season, and in the end, with 4 drivers going for the title, everybody had a chance theoretically, although Lewis was 24 points behind Webber, I think, before the last race. And in the end, everything was perfect for Vettel, for Red Bull. Only Mark Webber was disappointed from that team, but he didn't have a great race at the end of the season, and I think Vettel deserved that title. And probably that is why I'm a fan of this team, and particularly a fan of Sebastian Vettel. Probably this because this season, this last race in Abu Dhabi made me fall in love with that team.
What would you guys say were, I guess, some of the highlights of the season? I mean, for example, I can point out the Turkey 2010 crash, which we all know how significant it was, the one between Vettel and Weber. And what about you guys, though? Do you guys have any other moments like that throughout this season?
Well, I cannot say anything different from Du bist Weltmeister and the last race of the season.
Yeah, I was gonna say Turkey as well. It's quite a memorable one. And there were a few others. Maybe we can move on to the next season we're gonna discuss. David, your turn.
Yeah, my favorite season of all time, not just since I've been watching F1, it is the 2012 season, which is famous for having 7 different winners in the first 7 races. And those race winners, some of them were quite extravagant, it must be said, with the likes of Pastor Maldonado winning in Spain, as we all remember. But what I really love about this season is that it was truly the most chaotic and unpredictable season ever. I mean, there was not a single car that dominated throughout the season. You could even say that the McLaren had the best pace overall, but due to reliability issues, they constantly fell down the order and they finished 3rd in the constructors. Lewis Hamilton in particular, who could have mounted a title challenge, he had 5 retirements over the course of the season, which proved to be vital in his championship hopes. The main title battle ended up being between Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso, similar to 2010, except just the two of them. And that race in Brazil, the last race of the season, first of all, Brazil, the greatest season finale track possible, and with the mixed conditions, Vettel spins on the first lap, Alonso gets a great start, everything seems to be aligning for Alonso and not for Vettel. And then throughout the race, you also got these other storylines of Nico Hulkenberg leading the race and then crashing with Lewis Hamilton, and Sebastian Vettel making his way through the field and ending up clinching the championship by just 3 points. It was truly a sensational season, and we also have to remember this was Kimi Raikkonen's first season back from driving rally cars, and he finished 3rd in the championship, and we all know the classic, "Leave me alone, I know what I'm doing." Just incredible season for him as well. We also had the huge Spa crash in which Romain Grosjean infamously got a 1-race ban for Monza, which has not happened to any driver since that race, which is kind of crazy. Other notable facts, Mercedes picked up their first win in their return to the sport with Nico Rosberg in China. Overall, just unbelievable season. We had 8 different winners, as I mentioned, 7 in the first 7 races, which is pretty much almost impossible to repeat this feat again. What do you guys think about the 2012 season?
My opinion is that is one of the best seasons that we have seen in the recent history of the sport, and also with so many different winners without a clear title, like some team or driver who is leading the championship from the beginning till the end, and with different race pace throughout the whole season. We saw so many surprises throughout this whole season. We even saw, again, Kimi, when he returned to the sport, he even got a win in Abu Dhabi, and the win of Pastor Maldonado. Everything just came up together in the finale of the season in Brazil. So I can say that is also one of my favorite seasons so far that I've watched, and I really appreciate it as everything that happened throughout the whole year.
Yes, I can absolutely agree. It was quite an eventful season, and I remember it vividly in my memories. I also think that we have to mention the highlight of Spain, where Maldonado got his maiden and only win, and
Yeah, it was quite a surprising winner, to say the least. And also, you got to mention Fernando Alonso. He actually had a 40-point lead in the championship after the summer break. And Sebastian Vettel, he managed to turn it around, especially with a series of 4 wins in a row during the Asian swing of the season, which really boosted his title hopes. And in the end, managed to clinch the championship at the very last moment.
All right, I think we can move on to the most recent of the three seasons we're gonna discuss, and this is 2021. I have chosen this one as it was an amazing title fight between Verstappen and Hamilton. I enjoyed watching every race of this season. I mean, in the last race in Abu Dhabi, I was just completely shocked with what happened. But yeah, it was a season to remember. It was the first post-COVID season. There were a few changes in the drivers, and yeah, overall, the season began quite eventfully in Bahrain with a close battle between Verstappen and Hamilton, and then went on. I would say the whole season was it was Verstappen and Hamilton changing the first place and having some moments like, for example, in Monza when they crashed into each other. Also, Silverstone where Hamilton just punted Verstappen off the track, and of course Abu Dhabi. And I mean, the other drivers did not really stand a chance as it was a two-way fight. Bottas was the closest competitor, but he only got one win. Perez also got one win in Baku, but other than that, it was a two-way fight.
Yeah, but let's also mention the two pretty surprising winners, which were Esteban Ocon in Hungary and Daniel Ricciardo in Monza. Those were quite memorable races, has to be said. I remember Hungary, how half the field pretty much got knocked out by Bottas on the opening corner. And as you already mentioned, that crash between Verstappen and Hamilton at Monza and that iconic Daniel Ricciardo win. And overall, throughout the season, we saw Sergio Perez's first season at Red Bull, which somehow turned out to be his best season at Red Bull, which is pretty crazy to think about. And we saw also the rise of Lando Norris, especially throughout the first half of the season. He was extremely consistent and always up there. And it was quite an interesting season for many young drivers as well.
We also saw circuits like Qatar, I think, and Saudi for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we saw some really interesting dynamics throughout the whole season. And talking about Hamilton and Verstappen, the whole season they were chasing each other, and from the beginning everybody wanted something like that to happen because everybody was bored from the era of Mercedes dominance, and they received that was like a prize to all the F1 fans, probably the most interesting title battle that we have ever witnessed. And going to the final lap of the final race of the season, that was amazing. One of the most incredible races that I've ever seen in my life, and nobody knew what was going to happen till some of Hamilton or Verstappen crossed the line. And that was probably the most magical moment of this season. Although I also want to mention two really interesting, I have vivid memories of two races, and the first one was Russia, where Lando Norris couldn't get his maiden win, and Hamilton managed to secure this first place, but Verstappen somehow managed to be close to him, and that race was pretty chaotic, but also important for the championship standings. And probably the most important one for me was the two wins of Verstappen at the US and Mexico, where his car was slower, but he somehow managed to get that first place, and that proved to be critical at the end of the season for the standings. And Verstappen probably won because he managed to get these two wins.
Yeah, I think what makes this season really magical as well is how two drivers going into the last race are level on points. I mean, I remember how hype I was for this last race of the season, and it was really back and forth throughout the whole season. I thought Lewis was going to find a way, since he has done that in previous years, and this was during the Mercedes domination. And Mercedes did go on to win the Constructors as well, but that last lap, really chaotic, just unbelievable. I was really speechless and also just screaming out of my mind that how is this happening? I can't believe this is happening. Max Verstappen is about to win the world championship. He's about to defeat Lewis Hamilton, which seems like an impossible feat. And overall, I don't know, I just have incredibly fond memories of every single race. It was just either Hamilton versus Verstappen every race, and it was just incredible.
And when we didn't have Hamilton or Verstappen, we had some really random but interesting race like like Hungary or even Turkey when Valtteri Bottas managed to be prime Michael Schumacher and get pole position, fastest lap, win everything at once. And also just a quick mention for the Dutch and Belgium Grand Prix. That was the first Dutch Grand Prix since I think the 50s or 60s. And Verstappen got the win at his home Grand Prix, which needs to be praised. And the Belgium Grand Prix and the heavy rain, the second place of George Russell in the end at Williams, and the win of Verstappen. But again, that just added up to the chaos throughout the season, but probably that is one of the races that made it even more magical.
Yeah, guys, you summed it up perfectly. I mean, I'm not sure if I have anything to say, and
we can make some honorable mentions because there have been seasons in the past 15 years that needs to be mentioned. At first, I think 2016 and the dominance of Mercedes, but the title battle between Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, and also that crash in Spain, and everything till the end was unclear. So I think that was one of the better seasons in this period.
Yeah, I would agree. It's probably one of my favorites during the hybrid era, maybe even one of the best. But I would also like to mention the 2014 season as well, which was pretty similar, it has to be said. It was once again Hamilton versus Rosberg, but you really saw this rivalry just develop throughout the season. You know, you had that really good battle in Bahrain where they were still, you know, smiling and laughing together. And then you get Monaco where, oh, did Nico Rosberg miss the corner on purpose to get pole position? You know, you had the Spa incident. You had many, I guess, sour moments for both drivers, and going into the last race, it was quite tense, although a very anticlimactic end to the season. But I think it's still worthy of a mention considering how iconic the rivalry is.
yeah, I can agree with both of these. And I would also like to mention, not because it was a competitive season, but because it was a memorable one. It was probably the most dominant season we've ever witnessed in Formula 1. The 2023 season, I think Vasco is gonna agree with me, was one to remember. It was just so many memorable moments for Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was so dominant season, and we saw like a prime F1 driver performance there. Max Verstappen was just miles ahead of everybody else and deservedly won that title.
Yeah, the most memorable moment of that season was Singapore, pretty much. The sole non-Red Bull win has to be mentioned because the amount of records Red Bull broke during the season.
Well, I think that is all. Thank you for this conversation, guys. Really cool to mention, to go back in time and see what was F1 like 10 years ago. And I can say that this is all for today from us. We're looking forward to the next episode. Till then, like, subscribe and follow us and AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
If you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.